Diana from Adirondack Girl at Heart. I teach antique lovers how to create successful vintage and antique businesses that they love. I've been selling vintage for 25 years and I love teaching people about the business and about the objects themselves. I wanted to mention that this video is sponsored by my friends at WorthPoint, a web service that provides research and pricing materials for antique lovers and antique sellers. Today we're going to take a close look at vintage and antique flower frogs. If you're unfamiliar with these charming little devices, they help people arrange their flowers. Some of them sit inside vases, like this one sits on the bottom of a vase, and others were intended to sit on the top of a vase, like this one. I'm sure you've bought a bouquet of flowers in the past and brought them home and put them in the vase only to have them sort of splay out around the edges and they no longer look like the beautiful bouquet they were in the grocery store or the flower shop. And flower frogs were designed to help with that issue. Now in about 1956, a product called Oasis was invented. Sometimes it's called wet foam. You can buy it in different shapes. You would set this in the sink and let water run over it, and it absorbs a huge amount of water. And then you stick your flower, well, you place this into a vase or a receptacle and then place your flowers into the Oasis, and the water keeps the flowers fresh. And it almost killed the flower frog, except that collectors discovered them late in the 20th century and fell in love with them, just like I did. And so the flower frog is not dead. Pinning down the history of flower frogs has proven to be more difficult than you might think. There's not a lot of history written about them, but historians seem to agree that glass and ceramic flower frogs made an appearance in Europe during the 17th century. The earliest American patent for a flower frog is 1875 by a man named Mr. Van Sloan. It was a series of concentric circles leading up to a very small circle at the top. So it had a kind of a pyramid shape. If you find one of those while you're out shopping vintage, then you've hit the mother lode. Most of the flower frogs that people collect today date to the 20th century. And in fact, all of the examples I'm going to show you today are from the 20th century. Now, nailing down where the term flower frog actually came from is also very difficult because early patents refer to them as flower holders or flower arrangers. But it seems like at some point in the middle of the 20th century, some very clever person coined the term flower frog and it stuck. Now, we know that frogs sometimes sit in water and flower frogs are usually sitting in water. And so people guess that that may be where the term flower frog came from. But like I said, people liked it and it stuck. Flower frogs come in all different shapes, sizes, and materials. So let's jump in and take a look at some of them. Clear glass flower frogs are among the most common type of flower frogs that you'll find. They come in all different shapes and sizes. Some are flat on the top, some are rounded on the top. It's almost impossible to tell where they were made, whether they came from America, Japan, or Europe. They are very rarely marked, but I have this very cool example that is marked Japan, and it's also marked patent pending 1905. This straight-walled example is very uncommon, and the flat top makes it perfect for holding pens, which is how I use it on my desk. I would value this guy at about $25 to $30. The more common examples fall in the $5 to $20 range. This little one is a unique size, so he might go for more like $10 to $12. They came in all different colors as well. We have a beautiful cobalt blue example. I discovered on WorthPoint a website, a web service that helps antique lovers research their finds. Very similar piece sold last year for $26 on eBay, so that was helpful information. The way that we know whether frogs were intended to sit on the bottom of a vase or the top is that flower frogs with feet, like this one, you see, are meant to sit on the bottom because those feet allow water to flow freely underneath and feed the stems of the flowers. Whereas this example, which I showed you, sits on top of a vase, it would have come with a vase in the same color and style. It doesn't have the feet. It just has a ridge. So if you place this on the bottom of a vase, your flower stems wouldn't get any water. This is a really beautiful example. Has some nice embossing around the edge, likely made by Cambridge Glass, a well-known glass manufacturer in the United States. They were very well known for their figural flower frogs. Here's an example I found on WorthPoint, a beautiful glass heron, 12 inches, made out of clear glass. It sold for $36 in 2021. And here is an 8-inch pink glass female figure called Bashful Charlotte, and she sold for $92.80 last month. Isn't she sweet? Well-known potteries like Roseville and Weller got into the flower frog game in the 1920s, like many of the glass companies, and they began producing some really beautiful flower frogs. I have an example here, and it's unmarked. I gave you a peek at it earlier. It's two-tone blue with gold decoration. You can see around the edges and then the band on the side. This one's worth about $10 to $12. And this is a really fun example made in Italy, likely in the 1970s. Really cute little snail. I found the exact flower frog on WorthPoint, and it sold recently for $16.99, which is about what I would price it if I were going to sell it. Here's another figural flower frog, likely made in Japan, though it's unmarked. Really sweet little tortoise, and I would value him at about $10 to $12. And here's another Italian frog. I would date it to about the 1970s. It's got this very recognizable Italian hand-painted decoration, and I would value it at $12 to $15. And I found two other examples on WorthPoint that I want to show you. One is this gorgeous 10.5-inch matte finish pair of herons. It's by the pottery Kmark, and it sold for $55. And then there's this amazing frog by Fulper Pottery, which sold for an incredible $123. You definitely want to keep your eye out for that one, right? I did a little bit more research on Fulper and Kmark and learned that they were really well known for art pottery and matte finishes like you saw on these two flower frogs. The Japanese invented the pin type flower frog. They called them kenzan, and they used them to create their really beautiful, well-known flower arrangements called Ikebana. And in Japanese, the term kenzan means sword mountain. I thought that was so interesting and really apt because these are very sharp. Lead on the bottom to weight them, to hold them in place, and then usually the pins are made out of brass. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and colors, green and copper and unpainted are the most common. Here's a nice rectangular one. I found a box full of them at a garage sale. This box was made by Daisy, a famous flower frog company. And notice that frogs are not called frogs. They're called flower holder. And also this box initially held an interlocking flower frog. Interlocking frogs come in pieces, kind of like a puzzle. So it could have been a rectangular frog in 3 pieces that fit together, something like that. I recently sold a very cool interlocking frog. Each piece separately was in the shape of a leaf and then together in the shape of another leaf. And I sold it on Etsy the day I listed it for $26. The way that a home decorator would have found a flower frog would probably have been on a card like this at a garden center or hardware store. Interestingly, this one probably dates to about the 1950s or 60s and would sell for about $15. Initially, it sold for 39 cents. And notice they emphasize 100% lead base. Recently, I found at a sale a really interesting piece. This is a plastic base marked Japan on the bottom, embossed. And it is a series of miniature flower frogs in a metal frame that allows you to sort of move it in whatever shape you might like. And these little flower frogs are about 1/2 inch in diameter, the smallest I've ever seen. If I sold these separately, I think they would bring about $10 each. There's 20 of them. At least $5 each. As a set, I'm going to list them on Etsy for about, I'm going to start at $60 and see how it goes. But that's the first time I've ever seen anything like that. The next type of flower frog I have to show you are called cage flower frogs because their resemblance to a cage. In 1916, the Daisy Manufacturing Company patented this cage design. This one is marked Daisy on the bottom. It's embossed right there. And this second example that I have is unmarked. They would bring about $15 each from my antique booth. And like I mentioned, Daisy went on to also manufacture pin type flower frogs. The final flower frog I want to mention is the hairpin flower frog, which has a terrific story behind it. A woman named Ida Sinclair invented the frog in 1936 and created an entire company around it called the Blue Ribbon Flower Holder Company. She was unhappy with the way that simple glass and ceramic flower frogs performed, and she had the brilliant idea of inserting hairpins open side down into little cement blocks. Here's an example of one that I sold recently for $13. Now, where can you find flower frogs? Well, you can find them almost anywhere that antiques and vintage are sold. I find them at garage sales, at estate sales, at thrift stores. For example, this frog I picked up at Salvation Army for 99 cents. Flea markets, did I mention flea markets? Also, I noticed them being sold in lots of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 on eBay, frequently going for really low prices. So eBay's definitely a good place to check them out. Now, where to sell them? I sell most of mine either from my antique booth or from my Etsy shop. I put the more common variety in my antique booth, and they sell regularly. And then the more unusual, like that interlocking leaf pin type frog I showed you, on Etsy. To use a flower frog in the way that it was intended, you're going to want to make sure that your frog sits securely inside the vase or whatever receptacle you're using. And so you'll want to pick up some floral clay. Comes on a roll like this, or sometimes in a package where you just pinch off a piece. So you pull off, it's very sticky. Put it on the bottom of your flower frog, and then place the frog inside the vase and press down, and you see how secure that flower frog is. So that keeps your frog from moving around while you're trying to insert your stems into it. Let's take a look at some pictures of flower frogs in use. So first you see a ceramic frog where the stem is simply placed in the hole. In the pin type frog, the stems go either between the pins or sometimes they land squarely on the pointed end. And then with a cage frog, the stems go into the openings of the cage. And then with a hairpin frog, the stems will go between the hairpins. And each of them holds flowers in slightly different ways and with slightly different strengths. So you have to sort of test them out to see which you prefer. Flower frog collectors tend to display their frogs fairly simply, sometimes in a large wooden bowl or a large dough bowl, or on a shelf or in a cupboard. But there are a lot of ways to use them, a lot of interesting ways to use them. For example, the pin type frog can hold all kinds of paper ephemera, like a vintage flashcard or a vintage photograph. If you had a series of these on a shelf with old or new photos, I think that would be really darling. Or how about a vintage postcard? Easter is almost here. In your business, in your antique booth, you could use the frog to display your business cards or to show that you're having some kind of a sale. And I already mentioned using frogs to hold pencils. They can also hold other utensils like scissors. I have this display on my desk. It can also hold paint brushes or makeup brushes in your bathroom. Or how about button hooks? I think that would be really something to put a collection of button hooks in a flower frog like that. You've probably picked up on some of the reasons why collectors like flower frogs so much. One of them is that they are small, so they don't take up a lot of space as collectibles go. They are useful. They're environmentally friendly because you can use them instead of Oasis, which is really just meant for one use. They're reasonably priced, as we found, and they're fascinating. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about vintage and antique flower frogs. If you like this video, I would love it if you would like it, leave a comment, or subscribe. And as always, happy hunting. Many thanks to my friends at Worth Point for sponsoring this video. They are such a great resource for researching and evaluating your vintage and antiques. I really encourage you to give them a try. You can use the affiliate link in the description below to get more information about their service. And keep in mind that if you make a purchase, you'll be helping to support my channel. Thanks so much.